So we all know Canada is in an unprecedented housing crisis, which raises, I think, an important question. When supply is so constrained, why is CMHC, Canada's housing regulator, the Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation, putting the financial interests of Airbnb investors ahead of families? That's what I'm going to be chatting about today. My name is John Pasalis. My team and I help buyers and sellers throughout the Toronto area make smarter real estate decisions. If you'd like to meet with me and my team, you can just click the link in the show notes below or send me an email at askjohn@movesmartly.com. So just to unpack some of the data that has come out recently from Statistics Canada, they did an analysis of all Airbnbs in Canada and tried to figure out how many of these Airbnb rentals are not someone's principal residence. So again, someone's renting their home out for a short period of time, that's fine. But CMH or Statistics Canada is trying to figure out how many homes are basically just converted into full-time short-term rentals. These are homes that are not occupied by someone, like I said, as their principal residence, either a renter or a homeowner. They're just effectively homes that have turned into mini hotels. And what they found is that in Canada, there are over 100,000, I think it's 107,000 homes in Canada that are effectively being converted to short-term rentals, whether that's Airbnb or any other format. So obviously, these are homes that have the potential to be long-term, kind of permanent rental housing, or in some cases, maybe investors would sell them if they couldn't use them as short-term rentals and they'd be owner-occupied. But at the end of the day, we have over 100,000 homes that are no longer available to be occupied by families because investors have converted them to short-term rentals. Now, a lot of countries around the world, a lot of cities are looking at this and saying, okay, this is a challenge in an economy when supply is constrained, rents are increasing, home prices are increasing, which is why many countries and cities are putting in measures to curb the effects of this. We're seeing it in Europe, we're seeing it in Toronto, and even in the US. I mean, the US, of course, the land of the free is arguably even more aggressive at this than Toronto and Canada are. I saw some reports recently that Las Vegas is fining illegal Airbnb owners to the tune of over $50,000 and in some cases over $100,000 for operating illegal Airbnbs. And in Toronto, an illegal Airbnb is one that is not an individual's principal residence. If you want to rent your home for 3, 4, 5 months, that's fine. When you're not living there. But the idea is you can't take just a house and make it into a permanent Airbnb. So with so many countries, including the US, Europeans, and Toronto, advocating against these negative side effects, it was very interesting for me to see Canada's housing regulator, CMHC, their deputy chief economist, come out and basically say, who cares about 100,000 homes being used as short-term rental? His position that it's not a pivotal factor in our housing crisis. And in fact, he actually said we shouldn't do anything to discourage this because it might risk undermining the confidence in the desire to invest in new supply, is what he said on a LinkedIn post. So of course, the question, of course, is, this raises a number of questions. Are Airbnbs the cause of Canada's housing crisis? Obviously not. Our population's been booming. Our supply has not been increasing rapidly enough. This is not the single cause. But at the end of the day, it's 100,000 homes. So why would CMHC prefer to see over 100,000 homes in the hands of investors used as short-term rentals rather than put in families? Why would their deputy chief economist actually wants to see more of our housing supply being bought by Airbnb investors and converted to short-term rentals? Of course, keep in mind that when more and more of our housing supply is being bought by investors, this shrinks the overall supply that can be used by families, which is the whole point that Canada, presumably, at least what they tell us, is what they're trying to do. So why are they advocating for investors? And here I think it's important for people to understand, because housing policy can be a little bit nuanced and not clear. And what's driving this idea is, I mean, obviously not what is in the best interest of Canada, at least from my perspective, and its citizen. It's driven by really the economic and political ideology of housing economists today. Okay. And a lot of the vision and the ideas put forward by Canadian housing experts are really rooted in this really neoliberal capitalist, this free market capitalist ideology. And we see that most often, of course, when housing experts turn around and say, well, we need to remove all the barriers on supply. Let's kill zoning entirely. Let builders build whatever they want. Let's cut their development taxes, basically development fees. Just get out of the way and let builders build. So we see this kind of free market approach on the supply side. But when it comes to the demand for housing, they hold very similar views. And they're not as vocal about them because they're a little more controversial, but they're very supportive, as is Canada's CMHC's deputy chief economist, investors using homes however they want, using them as financial assets, converting them to Airbnb, so short-term rentals. They're fully supported of corporations just buying up as many of our homes as possible, big REITs, and talking about buying single family homes, converting them to rentals. So they don't really care how people use housing. They just think governments should get out of the way on the demand side, on the supply side, and we just need to build more homes and we will all live happily ever after. And of course, anyone who's kind of watched our show understands that I don't obviously subscribe to the current economic thinking. I mean, I think this is partly why we have a housing crisis, because so many economists are effectively throwing families under the bus to support housing as a financial asset for Airbnb investors. And I think it's important to remember that, homes always have this tension between being a financial asset on one hand and a social right on the other. And for years and years, I mean, decades ago, because things have changed, and I'll try to write more about this, housing was seen more as a social right. And it was an investment for families, right? It was an investment for families who could afford to buy a home to fund their retirement. And over the past 20, 30 years, the role of housing as an investment has shifted. It's now just no longer an investment for the individual homeowner. It's, of course, an investment for anyone who has a ton of capital who wants to use it as a short-term rental, for example, or buy as many homes as possible to put in their financial portfolio and basically convert them even into rentals, so REITs buying houses. So the role of housing has changed. We've moved more, CMHC has moved more towards housing as a financial asset and a means to wealth rather than as a social right. And that's a very big change. I mean, CMHC's former head, George Anderson, wrote a series of great lectures quite a while ago, where he kind of talked about, Canada jealously protecting our stock of affordable housing. And he actually came out and said, only government intervention could ensure, and I'm quoting him now, that all Canadians, regardless of where they lived, had the same rights, privileges, and living standards. And that's what my corporation's all about today, he said, the pursuit of that public policy purpose. So we've gone from, CMHC seeing their role as using housing as a social right and governments intervening to protect homes for families, to CMHC today, this very neoliberal free market capitalist institution that's effectively arguing for fewer policies, restrictions on housing, allowing investors to use homes however they want, and even if that is for short-term rentals in Canada. And I think that's a challenge. Again, I think, listen, at the end of the day, if investors wants to do that, the governments, I'm not judging investors. At the end of the day, investors are making a profit. The challenge here is not so much the Airbnb investors, it is policymakers, it's our government that are actually supportive of these measures. And as long as you have more and more investors using homes as a financial asset for their corporate portfolios, it's going to be harder for families to buy homes. So, I think as a country, as a nation, we have to think about what we prioritize. And I think certainly I'm going to get tons of comments arguing that, investors should be able to do whatever they want. I mean, all the power to those thinkers. And again, I'm just advocating. I think I tend to lean more towards housing as a social right for families, a lot like what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. So those are my thoughts on housing, and I think what I think is the shift in the political thinking and ideology that is rooting today's ideas and today's proposed solutions for our crisis, and why things keep getting worse, because you can't move towards a more affordable market if we're selling off our homes as financial assets to Airbnb investors. So if you have any questions, comments, I'd love to hear them. Post them below or shoot me an email at askjohn@moosesmartelite.com.